So it certainly felt as if after going through all those phone calls, there was so much to process. And I don't think I've processed it all yet. I think I need to listen back through them to really wrap my head around them. One of the things I did want to go back over is the comments that Stephan made, which to me sound like admissions of guilt. There's actually quite a few of them when you start to break down what was actually said. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. I've basically gone through all the phone calls from 13th of May through to the 16th of June and pulled out all the clips that to me sound like admissions of guilt. And then I'll play them through for you and I'll explain my thinking to you as we go along. Now, I probably should welcome the new subscribers who've come to my channel as a result of these phone calls. Thank you and welcome, and I think you are going to find this is a wonderful community to be part of because people are so respectful in their comments and there's some pretty amazing discussions that happen in the comment section of my videos. So welcome to all the newcomers. If you are listening for the first time, or if you're listening for, if you know, you're relatively new and you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. That way you get to know when my next videos come out. And of course, I would be greatly appreciative of it because it will help me to grow my channel and get more people seeing my videos. So yeah, just a quick welcome and also a quick thank you to those people who have given me super chats or super thanks this week. That is definitely greatly appreciated. I love all the support I can get, even if it's just the lovely comments that so many of you make in the comment section. I appreciate every one of you who has subscribed. You're helping me to build my channel. I love the community that is happening here on this channel. So enough of that. Let's jump in and have a look at these things that Stephan said in his phone calls that to me sound like admissions of guilt.
Were you expecting these charges?
No.
The murder charge.
Oh, well, you know you're not.
Okay, so you got blindsided by that.
Yeah. Obviously, it's not true. I never would have wanted her gone for any reason, so, premeditated first degree is kind of a dick punch.
So, if you actually listen to what he said here, the concern here isn't about the red rum charges. The thing that he has an issue with is that he's being accused of premeditated red rum. Because, according to him, he never would have wanted her gone. So to me, that says that he's admitting that he did it, but that it wasn't premeditated. Now, there are actually, when you look at the definition of premeditated, I can see where they're coming from. I would say that he snapped, lost his temper. The fact that he did not then control his temper and continue to act on that makes it premeditated, basically. But him essentially saying, I never would have wanted her gone, so it was a D-punch to be accused of premeditated. Right there, to me that sounds like an admission of guilt. I did it, but it was accidental.
And we were very happy that I was there. We were very happy that the three of us were together. It was shaping up to be a great week and a great visit. There's no reason for anything to happen that happened.
Again, essentially he's saying that whatever happened was accidental. There is no reason for anything to happen that happened. In other words, he's acknowledging there something happened, but that it wasn't premeditated in his mind in terms of there's no reason for it to happen, it just happened. By admitting that something happened, sure as heck sounds like an admission of guilt to me.
And is there some explanation why you left and went where you went?
I was driving around.
Okay, understood you were driving around, but they know where you were driving around.
Yeah. Well,
And we know.
okay. I had wanted to grab a few things and get my ducks in a row, kind of prepare myself for whatever was coming, but I couldn't find what I was looking for.
So, one of Australia's most famous miscarriages of justice cases is the Lindy Chamberlain case. You've probably heard of it, but not realised that you've heard of it. This woman had a fairly young baby. They were at Uluru, which back then in the 80s was called Ayers Rock, and they were camping. And there were other people camping in the area too. So they had put their kids to bed in the tent, and they were pretty much in another tent beside that tent with their friends, just, kicking back as you do. And Lindy went out to the tent just in time to see a dingo leaving, and discovered that the dingo had actually gone into the tent and taken her baby Azaria, from the tent and run off with the baby. Now, they never actually found Azaria. And what happened after that was that Lindy was actually accused of being responsible for the death of her daughter. She was even charged, and she ended up being found guilty and spent quite a long time in jail before she was finally exonerated. Basically what had happened, the Northern Territory Police had just basically decided in their heads that this mother must be guilty. They had deliberately ignored any evidence that would have pointed to her being innocent, including a lot of evidence that showed that there was a dingo in the area, and accounts from an Aboriginal tracker who had actually found dingo tracks and had said that the dingo tracks showed the dingo was carrying something quite heavy, and had said that they could see spots where the dingo had put down what it was carrying, probably, to rest, and then continued on. That all that evidence was ignored. Any evidence they could find that made her look guilty, they used. So she spent a really long time in jail. I'm pretty certain it was over a decade. It's so long ago I can't even remember. But she was put in jail. She was convicted, put in jail. When she was finally exonerated, one of the things she said in pretty much every interview was that it was like a gut punch when the guilty verdict was made, because she knew she was innocent and she had faith in the justice system. So her belief was that because she knew that she was innocent, there's no way she could have possibly been considered guilty. So when that guilty verdict came down, it just was something that was unfathomable to her. So how does that apply to this situation? Well, they're talking about Stephan's trip down to Northport. Now we know before this trip to Northport that Jen had apparently said to him, they're looking at you, they've got the wrong person. So even she had expressed to him, supposedly, that she believed he was innocent and that they were looking at him when he was innocent. What does he do? He goes down to Northport, goes and logs onto his computer at his parents' place for 40 minutes, does something else for another 40 minutes roughly, and then heads back. Now, he's just been asked about this by his father. Now, first of all, you wouldn't expect an innocent person to do this in the middle of the night. But you would expect, let's say there was a good reason, and I can't think of any reason whatsoever, but let's say there was a good reason for him to do that. Maybe he thought there was a clue down there to help him find Maddie. Highly unlikely, but let's just go with that because it sounds like a Stephan kind of story. Then he would come up with that explanation. But that's not the explanation he offered to his father. He said he went down there to get his ducks in a row and to prepare himself for whatever was to come. They're the words of a guilty person. He knew he was going to be arrested. If he was truly innocent, why would he be expecting to be arrested? In every case where an innocent person has been arrested, after they've been exonerated, you always hear the same story. They never imagined that they were going to be found guilty because they knew they were innocent and they had faith in the justice system. Never do we hear anything like that from Stephan. He was expecting that arrest.
I wish there was a way that, you know, you and I can have a conversation, all of us could have a conversation to understand what's taken place, how this came about, how you arrived here, because it would help us better understand the situation, because we're at a loss for understanding how all this came about. I mean, we're just totally baffled.
Well, I didn't start it.
Oh, you didn't start it, but you participated in it, which is just as bad as not starting it. But
So Chris gave him an opportunity there to basically turn around and say, I don't know how this all happened because I'm innocent. This is all blown out of proportion. They're looking at the wrong person. But that's not the answer we get. Stephan's answer is, I didn't start this. Meaning that, well, he's definitely responsible for what happened to Maddie. But he's blaming somebody else for starting it. Whether he is blaming Jen for sending him upstairs with Maddie, or whether he is blaming Maddie because maybe Maddie lost her temper with him. He's essentially saying he didn't start it. That means he was involved, he was part of the action. Of course, we know that it's all on him. But to turn around and say, I didn't start that, that is definitely an admission of guilt.
it almost sounds like you didn't know something had happened to her.
Well, I discovered her in the state that she was in after everything was said and done. So I mean, obviously I can't get into detail, but
So he's saying he discovered her after everything was said and done. That basically, to me, sounds like an admission of guilt. That is basically saying things happened that night. Things were said that night. Yeah, he can say he discovered her after all that. But then he turns around and he says, I can't get into the details. That is his classic evasion. And we hear that so often. And I hope that when they play all these calls for the jury, that the jury pick up on the fact that every time he's trying to avoid giving an answer, he can't get into the details. But to hear someone say, after everything was said and done, definitely implies action and words. So, what exactly was said and done, Stephan? Because clearly, whatever was said and done resulted in Maddie being no longer alive.
no, I was not aware that she had passed on.
Hmm.
As you know, I'm up and down throughout the night, and I was not in the room the whole time. I mean, it's not like you just suddenly feel someone's ghost pass away from them. It's a discovery. And
So she wasn't even in the same room with you?
well, I mean, she was in the room that I started in, but I'm up and down throughout the night, and I tend to wander around the house and fiddle around on my phone and step out front and feel the nice cool night air and all that.
So, in between all that jabbering is the simple fact that even if he wasn't in that room the whole time, he was in the room with Maddie, in the room where she died. Can we place anybody else in that room? It doesn't appear so. So he can turn around and say, I was in and out of the room all the time. And I realise now that I made a mistake in my other video saying that I thought he said that he had said that he heard her ghost leave her body, or saw her ghost leave her body or something. But he's saying it's not like you experience her ghost leaving her body, which is an odd thing to say. But he's basically trying to claim that in the time that he was out of the room, something happened, nothing to do with him, even though no one else had entered that room, and she just kind of randomly became unalived. Yeah, good one, Stephan. Like I said, take away all the extra jabber, and you have him admitting that he was in the room with Maddie. No one else was in the room with Maddie. He was in the room with Maddie. Regardless of whether or not he came and went through the night. Whose room was it? It was his room. It was a guest room that he was using. Jen was supposedly asleep downstairs. So unless he can come up with some solid evidence that would prove that Jen was upstairs in that room, then basically all eyes are on him. And I'm pretty certain there's not going to be any solid evidence to prove that Jen was upstairs in that room. I know people would like to believe that she did it, but let's not make it easy for the defence. We know this guy was responsible. Do we really want to give him a free pass by believing in conspiracy theories?
I was gone from the room for, obviously I really can't get into too many details, but
Yeah, he can't figure out how long to say that he was absent from the room from, can he? So instead, he's going to say, I really can't get into too many details.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't discover what had happened until just around dawn.
Okay. Interesting.
Because I discovered that she was ice cold.
Okay, here's the thing. He's trying to establish this notion that it couldn't have been him because he was in and out of the room, meaning that let's create plausible deniability here. Let's create some doubt. If he wasn't in the room all night, then how can you possibly be 100% certain that it was him? He wasn't in the room the whole time. But then he says he discovers her around dawn and she was ice cold. Well, on the surface you could think, wow, that must have been hard for him. So he didn't realise he'd been in and out of the room and he didn't realise she was deceased until he discovered her ice cold around dawn. You know what the problem with this is? If you do your research, you will find that, and this I remembered because of the Delphi case, there was early days, they spoke about a drone pilot using a heat sensor to try and find the girls at night, and that he had found deer, like a heat pattern for deer, but he hadn't come across the girls. I believe that if that is the case, that in fact the heat pattern probably was the deer standing over the girls, because you see that so often when a person is deceased out in the open, and there is just something about wild animals that they will stand over them. So I think that's why they missed the girls. But going back to Maddie, if he's claiming that she was ice cold around dawn, then there's two things here. One of two things. Either he's lying about that, or Maddie had already been deceased for close to 12 hours. Because the human body loses roughly 1.5 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit of body temperature per hour after a person is deceased. Meaning that it takes about 12 hours for a person to become cool to touch. In which case, she would have also been in full rigour. We know that when he put her in that car, she wasn't in full rigour. So he's actually lying here about finding her at first light or at dawn and her being cool to touch. Because the thing is, he then drove around with her in the car till after 9 before he went into a parking garage and transferred her into the trunk of the car. Now, I don't want to sound morbid, but it would have been very difficult for him to transfer her into the trunk of the car had she been in full rigour at that point in time. In fact, it would have been very hard for him to put her in the car and have it appear that she was simply strapped in and asleep had she been in full rigour. So at 7:30 that morning, when he put Maddie in that car, she hadn't been deceased for 12 hours. She was not in full rigour, so she was not cold to touch. She wasn't ice cold. So he's lying, which to me says, if you have to lie about finding somebody deceased, and you have to lie and say that they were ice cold to touch when you found them, when all the evidence shows that that's not possible, well, sorry, but that puts the focus straight back on you. That means that maybe he did go out of the room a few times through the night, but nobody else entered that room, and you've just lied about her being cold to touch, about her being ice cold. That certainly sounds like an admission of guilt to me.
Was there anybody else at the townhome that was not a regular person?
No, which is why I keep saying that I'm not sure that there's any one person, honestly, to blame. But they're certainly trying to blame me. And according to the autopsy report, like I said, raises a lot more questions. But
So there's two things here which basically point to an admission of guilt. Chris asked him if there was anybody else at the townhouse that wasn't a regular person, and Stephan admits no, there wasn't. So that means that that night in that townhouse, there were 4 adults, 2 children, 1 dog and 1 cat, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Because Stephan claims that there was not any one person to blame. Okay, so we don't have a random stranger in the house that you could blame it on. Someone who maybe shouldn't have been around Maddie. Yes, there was someone who shouldn't have been around Maddie, but they were a regular person in the house. This comment, not any one person to blame, that definitely sounds like an admission to guilt to me. That sounds very similar to, I didn't start this. Let's look at it rationally. You have, like I said, 4 adults in the house, 2 children, a dog and a cat. There's no motive for the flatmates. Why would they have any interest in unaliving Maddie? Why would a 12-year-old autistic boy have any interest in unaliving Maddie? And if we want to go into Stephan's little fantasy world, because he, in his fantasy world, may come up with some reason to blame the dog and the cat, but they don't have opposing thumbs. A cat can't strangle you in your sleep. A dog can't strangle you in your sleep. Because, don't forget, Maddie was strangled. Even if the toxicology report shows high toxicity of drugs in her system that weren't her prescribed ones, which I think will show, the cause of death was ruled strangulation because of that broken hyoid bone. So let's go back to not any one person to blame. Like I said, logic would mean that we preclude the flatmates. Absolutely no reason to believe that they could do anything like that. No motive whatsoever. Well, that only leaves him and Jen. So if he's saying not any one person to blame, well, given that we've eliminated everyone but him and Jen, then he's saying that he, at least, in the very least, shares the blame. Well, I think we can be a bit more confident than that.
I guess if there's one thing that we wish for is that you had come to us sooner, that you had come to us and let us know what was going on.
Well, unfortunately, I was suffering from a bit of cowardice.
Again, so they're saying they wish he'd gone to them sooner to let them know what had gone on, and he claims he was suffering from a bit of cowardice. If you were innocent, why would you consider yourself a coward? If you were innocent, why would you do all the things that he did? Put Maddie in the car, drive her around for several hours, and then take her and dump her. Cowardice is what occurs when someone is guilty of something and they don't want to admit to it. So by admitting that he was a coward, to me that sounds like an admission of guilt.
And I was thinking earlier today or yesterday that somehow I feel that you were forced into this, and I don't know, and that's just my speculation, that you were compromised and you were forced to participate in this, and as soon as you got away from the rest of them, you should have called me, and we should have and could have discussed this, and the outcome would have been a lot different than what it is right now. But
I don't want to get your hopes up, and as I said, don't get carried away with any conspiracy theories, but in a way I was compromised, and, when all that stuff was happening, I was not in my right mind anymore.
So Chris was actually giving Stephan an out there. He was giving him an alibi, an excuse. Basically saying that he was roped into it all and it wasn't his choice to do it, and that he should have just contacted them after he got away from those people so they could fix it for him. Basically implying that Stephan was forced to do the things he did to cover up for somebody. And how does he respond? He doesn't run with it. Doesn't in his head go, that's a good alibi, I'm going to run with that. No. He says, I don't want you to get your hopes up. Honestly, is that the words of an innocent person? It is so far from what you would expect to hear from someone who was innocent. If he was innocent, he would be proclaiming his innocence right then and there. Yes, I got caught up in it. I should have spoken up before I got the blame. I'm innocent and I'm being made to take the rap for this. None of that. No, he's like, I don't want to get your hopes up. And then, just to make sure that they're clear on what he's saying, don't get carried away with any conspiracy theories. To me, that is a breath away from saying, because I was the one who did it. Why else would they not get carried away with any conspiracy theories? If he was innocent, then these things that Chris was saying would make sense. And Stephan would be like, I'm so glad you believe in me. You know, I've been framed and, you know, all the things that you would expect to hear from an innocent person. But no, he doesn't want them to get their hopes up because he knows he's guilty. That is an admission of guilt. Don't get your hopes up. I am guilty.
And I wish I had done the correct thing to begin with. You know, I wish I had run downstairs and shaken her awake and called 911 and all that. And deserved
Well, I wish you had too. I wish you had too. Maybe she could have been saved, but
she was beyond that.
Okay.
Now, when you talk about being in a situation where you need to shake someone awake and call 911, that makes it sound like there is an emergency. Why would he need to shake Jen awake to call 911 if Maddie was deceased? Sure, you would want to wake her up. But saying shaking someone awake, that, like I said, implies urgency. It needs to be dealt with straight away. But according to Stephan, no, it was too late to save Maddie at that point. But he wished he'd called 911 and shaken Jen awake. I'm sorry, that sounds more like someone talking about realising that they have gone too far and that they've done something serious to this child and they need to call emergency straight away. Maybe he had realised that she wasn't breathing and thought it was too late. But if he's saying that he thought he wished he'd shaken Jen awake and called 911, to me that gives the suggestion that he wished he'd acted immediately. Not that he found her cold the next morning. There is a sense of immediacy in the way that he's saying that. Maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but that's how I would interpret it. To me, it sounds like another guilty admission. And in fact, Deb even got the impression that what he was saying was he wished he'd acted earlier. Because she said, then maybe you could have saved her. So even her understanding of what he was saying was that he wished he'd have acted as soon as there was something wrong. Deb even thought that he was talking about the emergency of something having just gone horribly wrong and needing to act on it straight away. You know, that whole shaking someone awake. You shake someone awake because there is a matter of urgency. Otherwise, he would just be saying, well, I should have just woken Jen up and said this is what happened. And don't forget, he claims that he was in and out of Jen's room several times that morning. So he did actually wake Jen up. He didn't need to shake her awake. Just going in and out of her room woke her up. To me, it definitely sounds like the drongo is admitting guilt here.
She was still upstairs.
Oh, she was upstairs. Okay.
Yeah, I left her alone there.
Oh, okay.
I had gone downstairs for a while, and by the time I realized anything was wrong, it was just far too late. You know, she'd been gone for a while. Seeing her pale face and blue lips and how ice cold she was, and
Yes, blue lips, plausible, given that she couldn't breathe because of what he did. But as I already said, 2 degrees Fahrenheit an hour for a body to cool down. 12 hours for it to become cool to touch. A person doesn't just die and then automatically become freezing cold. It is a process. So here we can see that he is lying outright. And by his lies, that is essentially an admission of guilt. Why would you need to lie about something like this if you were innocent? The only reason that he's lying is because he wants to create the impression that he was absent when Maddie died. And how does he think he can do that? By claiming that when he discovered her, when he went back into the room, she was cold. Well, she wasn't, and he knows that.
a very, 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 very slim chance of doing anything about any of this, and I'm praying to God and asking for His help to make it possible, but
There's a very, very, very slim chance of doing anything about this. Going back to what I said earlier, if he was innocent, he would be confident, especially given that he's had conversations with his lawyers. He would be confident that, well, actually, there's nothing here that proves that I did it. So I feel confident that when this goes to trial, that they will see that I'm innocent and that I will be set free. But we never hear any of that. He doesn't even try to protest his innocence. According to him, there's only a very, very, very slim chance of him getting out of this situation. Well, to me, when someone says that there's only a very, very slim chance of getting this out of this situation, where they are incarcerated, they are charged with serious crimes and facing the DP, that sure as heck sounds like an admission of guilt.
one of my biggest regrets is that I've been so cavalier and so careless with the people that cared about me and that relied on me to be better than I was.
He regrets being so careless with the people who cared about him and relied on him to be better than he was. Now, when someone says they regret being careless, that means it's because of their carelessness, something bad has happened. I bought myself a set of these gorgeous rainbow fusion glassware, and they were really expensive. And I put one in the sink before starting the washing up and ran the hot water directly over this glassware, this glass. And because obviously there was cold air inside the glass, running the hot water on the outside of it caused it to break. That was me being careless. I wasn't putting any thought into it, and I couldn't fix it afterwards. Him saying that he was careless with the people who cared about him, to me that sounds like an admission of guilt. He did something without thinking, and it had irreparable results. These were people that relied on him to be better than he was. And he's talking about this in relation to him now being incarcerated and in relation to Maddie's death. So he's essentially saying that he's wound up in prison because he was careless with the people who cared about him. He was careless with Maddie. Well, that doesn't sound like someone who apparently just found her deceased the following morning, does it? It sounds like someone whose actions resulted in her death. She relied on him to be better than he was because he was careless, and it cost her. In the context, given that he's talking about Maddie, he's talking about Maddie dying, he's talking about him winding up being in jail, how else can you interpret it other than it being an admission of guilt?
That's things I'd probably do differently. But, I just wish I'd been more careful with the people that I loved.
Well, maybe you'll get a second chance at that, but
I was hoping that I
you got a big hill to climb up, that's for sure.
Yep, I know it's very thin chances, but I hope that you and Mom will pray for me to get that second chance. Okay.
Again, talking about being careless with the people that he loves. And then, when Chris is essentially talking about it being an uphill climb to try and fix the situation, Stephan says, it's a pretty slim chance. If you believed you were innocent, you wouldn't think that it was a pretty slim chance of you being able to get out and make things right with the other people around you. But according to Stephan, it's a pretty slim chance, and he needs his parents to pray for him. Again, this sounds like the words of someone who is admitting that they're guilty. He knows he's guilty. That's why he's saying it's a pretty slim chance. He's pretty much got a snowball's chance in hell of getting out of there, and he knows it.
Basically, you got the news then that they filed this morning to seek the death penalty.
Yeah.
How are you guys holding up?
Well, we're just waiting for this to play out, so,
Yeah.
So, Debbie, your mother said that you were officially charged with murder. I didn't know about seeking the death penalty. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, well, it was always a possibility. And the level
Yeah.
they charged me at, obviously, if they seek it, there's a good chance that they can get it. So at 10 o'clock this morning, they officially filed for intent to seek death.
So this conversation is actually happening on the same day that the state filed the paperwork seeking the DP for Stephan. And listen to how nonchalant he is about it. He's accepted it. He even says if they seek it, there's a pretty good chance they're going to get it. Well, there's a good chance they're going to get it if you are guilty. But if you are innocent, then shouldn't you be a little bit concerned right now? Shouldn't you be saying, well, either don't worry, because obviously I'm guilty. There's not going to be a guilty verdict, so we don't have to worry about it. Or, oh my gosh, I'm so terrified because what if something goes wrong and the jury gets it wrong and then they decide to vote for a DP? There's no distress here whatsoever. If he was innocent, he would not be speaking in this way. The fact that he is so calm about this DP, the fact that he is accepting that if it's being sought, then it will probably occur, this to me is a major, major admission of guilt. There's no objection from him whatsoever to the DP. He seems to think it's just the way things are going to play out. Like I said, if you in your heart believe you are innocent, for starters, you would be freaking out about now. But you certainly wouldn't be accepting it as an inevitability, which is what he seems to be doing.
People.
Well, I hate to say it, but I'd rather be on death row too, because I agree with them. It's a much easier way out.
Yep.
I'd rather,
And like you said, there'll be appeal after appeal after appeal, and
Yeah, she said it could take up to 25 years for them to finally get around to executing me if I'm found guilty.
yeah, and by that time you might welcome it, but we won't be here to see it.
By that time, it's about all I've got in me to serve anyway, so.
So he's saying here that he would much prefer that his sentence be the DP. He thinks it's a better option. If you were innocent, why would you even have a preference between the two? You would feel like your world was crumbling in on you. You certainly wouldn't be talking about it so calmly. And while he does say, it could be up to 25 years if I'm innocent, he's saying that because he's basically repeating what his lawyer has said. His lawyer said this. So he's not saying, from what I know, it could be this long. I could get this long, unless I'm innocent. The innocent side of it is coming from his lawyer. Basically, he's not directly claiming innocence here. He's talking about a conversation with his lawyer. To him, the topic here is the fact that he hopes that he gets given the DP, and he's expecting that he's going to be in there for 25 years or more. Meaning that he's expecting a guilty verdict. If you're innocent, you don't expect a guilty verdict.
No worries. I guess I took the news pretty well, though.
Well, okay, that's good.
I'm just remarkably calm about everything. I had this overwhelming sense of peace and serenity, and I don't know, maybe that will change, maybe it won't, I don't know.
It goes without saying, doesn't it? No innocent person is going to claim, after being told that they are quite possibly facing the DP, no innocent person is going to turn around and say that they have this sense of peace and serenity. They would be freaking out. They would be screaming their innocence from the rooftops. There's no way they would be claiming a sense of peace and serenity. the only way a person is going to claim peace and serenity from being told that they are possibly facing the DP is if they are guilty. So to me, this is yet another admission of guilt.
No grand conspiracy here to hurt her.
Were you awake when sent her into the room with you?
Yeah.
And she was fine when she came into your room? What time at night was that?
Maybe 11-ish or so, I'm not sure.
Okay, so she was fine, so what happens between 11 and whenever you found her?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? She went
Yeah.
to sleep.
I mean, when you say you were out of the room, for what length of time were you out of the room?
I don't know.
15 minutes?
No, I left the room a couple times. The first time I left to go to the bathroom, and the second time I was out of the room for maybe a couple hours or so, maybe more. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Well, that was...
Okay, well, let's break this one down. First of all, he is admitting that when him and Maddie went upstairs together into that room, she was perfectly fine. And Chris asks him then, so Chris is on to him well and truly here. He's realised that Stephan is lying, and he's trying to get Stephan to actually admit the truth here. But Stephan's being about as evasive as he can be. Chris wants to know, well, if she was fine when you went into your room with her, what happened between then and when you found her? Again, Stephan hasn't got an adequate answer, so comes out with this ridiculous, well, that's $1 million question. Well, actually, no, it's not, Stephan. It's a pretty simple question with a simple answer. The fact that you were the only person in the room with her, she was fine when you went into the room with her, means that it sounds pretty damn certain that you were the person responsible. To me, by admitting that she was perfectly fine when they went into the room, he is admitting guilt. But not only that, Chris asks him about, how long were you out of the room? 15 minutes the first time, a couple of hours the next time. Well, that straight up shows that it has to be an outright lie that he found Maddie cold. If he was out of the room for a couple of hours, then during that period of time, her body would have only cooled at the most 4 degrees Fahrenheit. That is absolutely minimal. That's minuscule. You wouldn't even notice a difference in terms of touching her, in terms of body temperature. So here, he's admitting that he lied, because he's basically showing he wasn't out of the room for long enough for her body to have cooled that much. Meaning that he was there with her that entire time after she died. To me, these statements here are definitely another admission of his guilt. He hasn't thought his lies through, doesn't realise that he's giving himself away.
But no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And if the worst comes to worst, I know that I'll make my peace and I'll meet with all my loved ones on the other side.
If the worst comes to the worst, he'll make his peace. Wow. I'm wondering how many people out there would make their peace with being unfairly accused and then convicted of red rum, of a 13-year-old child for that matter. Because if you were innocent, you wouldn't make your peace with it. You would fight it. You would be screaming that you were going to fight it. Not Stephan. If the worst comes to the worst and he is convicted, he's just going to make his peace with it. If that's not an admission of guilt, I don't know what is.
But I don't want to get too much into details or
Yeah, I know.
confirm or deny anything officially, anything that could possibly be used against me. I mean, I haven't seen the inside of a courtroom yet, so it would be kind of stupid to be making anything that could be construed as an admission of guilt.
I'm sorry. He doesn't want to say anything, essentially, that would be an admission of guilt. Well, if you were innocent, then nothing that you were going to say would sound like an admission of guilt, surely. To say that it hasn't reached the courtroom, so I don't want to say anything that is going to be taken as an admission of guilt, to me is saying I'm guilty, so I've got to be careful what I say because I don't want these recordings to be used against me in court to show that I'm guilty. It's not something that would be a consideration for someone who believed they were innocent. That is definitely, to me, an admission of guilt. So that brings us to the end of this video. I think there's a lot of things here that basically paint the picture for Stephan in a not so good way. He has well and truly landed himself in it, if you ask me, when you listen to the things that he said. The way he talks, the things he says, these are not the words or the conversations that you would hear from someone who is innocent. The things that I've gone through here seem to me to point well and truly to him being guilty. You never once hear him claim that he's innocent. In fact, every time his parents try and pin it back on someone else, he tells them not to get caught up with these conspiracy theories. In terms of sentencing and looking to the future, he's resigned to the fact that he is going to be on D row. There's never any objection to any of this. This is someone who is guilty as, and they know it. He doesn't realise what he's saying clearly, because you get all the many, many excuses from him. But at the end of the day, you just have to listen to him to know that he is guilty. And whether or not he realises it, he has well and truly admitted guilt multiple times throughout these phone calls. So on that note, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. Please, if you are new to my channel, please subscribe. I would love to reach that 5,000 subscriber mark. Also, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. I always enjoy reading your comments. So, Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I begin to wonder